Good afternoon, everyone. This is Barry Dahl, Senior Community Manager for the Brightspace Teaching and Learning Community. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. I will introduce our speaker in just a moment. As usual, I've got a few quick announcements for you. The webinar platform, which is powered by On24, it gives you the opportunity to customize your experience. And so you can move the windows around, make them bigger, make them smaller. The slide or the live view window is one that you can make as large as you want if it helps to look at the slides, etc. If you're on a small screen, like maybe a regular laptop screen or something, you might not be aware that there's another box that could be invisible to you. You may need to scroll. On the left side, there's a speaker bio, a Q&A box, and a resource list below that. So if you have a small screen, you may need to scroll to see the resource list below that. There are also a few other functions here. The tray at the bottom has some icons, including the group chat window. So you may want to open the group chat. What I would suggest, and you can do what you like, but the Q&A pod is a great place to ask a question directly about the presentation, something that you'd like the presenter to answer. If you have to share your own thoughts and that sort of thing, please do, and the group chat is a great place to do that. So everybody can see the group chat. We will try to make sure that all questions for the presenter do get answered as we go. And so I think that's, in that resource list, by the way, our presenter has shared a handout for today, so you may want to take a look at that. I did notice that when you click the link, it opens in a web page, and you may need to just do a right-click Save As if you were going to save it or that sort of thing. But we will also make that available on the archive page, and I'll have information about that coming up here real quickly. I think that was already shown. Yeah. All right, so Fusion is our next big event. It is our biggest event of the year. July 19th and 20th, we will be at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. On Friday, the July 21st, that's our post-conference kind of deep dive training type workshops. But the main conference on Wednesday and Thursday, I'm very excited about our keynote speaker this year, Ray Kurzweil, someone who I have read and followed and learned from over many years now. First time I'm going to get to see him speak live, and I'm really excited about that. Really top-notch speaker and one of the great idea men of our generation. Also, another great idea man is John Baker. John always has a significant presence and will be doing the opening keynote at the conference. And so hopefully you can join us at the Bellagio in Las Vegas next month. Even though it'll be hot, there's lots of air conditioning in Las Vegas. We do have a couple of upcoming webinars. A week from today in the Teaching and Learning series, I will be doing a webinar for those who want to get started with the use of intelligent agents. One thing we found in some of our research, this tool that has been around for almost 10 years now, there's still quite a few people who do not use it, and some people who are kind of afraid of it. And I find that sad because it's nothing to be afraid of. I love this tool, and so I'm going to have a kind of a primer on how to use it, and also give away a couple of prizes to people who can create their first intelligent agent. And then tomorrow, not part of the Teaching Learning series, but I thought it was worthy of mentioning, we have a webinar on CBE, competency-based education in K-12, so you may want to check that one out as well. We archive all of the webinars, and so there are currently 4 years worth of webinars on the Teaching and Learning site. I will be adding the recording and the slides and the handout from today. Probably within about 24 hours, they'll be up there. Just a heads up that this will change fairly soon. We're going to be launching a new community site. We'll still have all this information available, but the link could end up changing. We'll try to do our best to make sure you can still find it. For now, this works, and in the new community site, we will try to make this as easy to find and share with you how to find it as well. We plan to continue to make all the archives available. And with that, I would like to introduce today's speaker. I'm pleased to have Beth Renee Ropnack of the University of West Georgia join us for her topic on restructuring online discussions. She has a lot of great content. I have seen a preview, and so I'm excited about this webinar as well. With that, Beth Renee, take it away.
Hello and welcome. My name is Beth Renee, as Barry said, and thank you, Barry and D2L, for giving me an opportunity to share this information with you. Today I'm going to talk with you about how you can restructure your online discussions to save time and increase engagement with your students. feel free to ask questions along the way, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. So my plan is to give you a little background about myself, share my journey sort of with online and how online discussions became a problem for me, and then how I solved that problem. We'll be looking at changing the structure of online discussions and changing the question style. So I've always had an interest in trying to understand how we learn and how we can teach people based on that information. I completed my master's degree in cognitive psychology at Arizona State University and my doctoral degree in education leadership at Colorado State University. I've taught online since 1997, but I was reluctant to online at first because I just didn't think that we could create the magic of that online classroom or the face-to-face classroom in an online environment. But I thought I'd give it my best effort. My first online class was that IRC dial-up chat, and if any of you might remember that and then you were connected, right? And so all we could do was exchange words, but it was exciting. It was great, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. Now that was a synchronous online chat, but we had really great discussions. Then learning platforms came along. And with it, administrators and that post and reply to, and that became the norm. And I was miserable. I was bored with online discussions. So today I'm going to share with you how I found my way out of that. Also, after teaching face-to-face, hybrid, blended, and online courses for over 20 years, I moved to become the Director of Online Faculty Development here at the University of West Georgia. I'm also a Quality Matters certified instructor for applying the QM rubric and improving your online class. And I'm a QM peer reviewer, and I've taken various other QM classes. And for those who aren't familiar with Quality Matters, it's a course design rubric, and they do course reviews to help with course design. So I'm going to start with talking about classroom discussions, since that's the standard we often use. In our best classroom discussions, students are engaged, right? They're excited to answer questions, and as the discussion moves around the room with students responding to what their peers have said, problems are solved. They can form a cohesive learning community. Now here's how I think that might look online. Right? So in this discussion, at the top here, the instructor started the thread, right? And students are instructed to reply to each other, just like in a classroom discussion. So the instructor can then jump in at any time to deepen, broaden, or redirect the conversation to a more fruitful area, just like in a classroom. If you allow students to edit the subject line, it's easy for students to identify and jump into these sub-discussions that naturally develop. And I'll talk more about those in a bit. But once I changed this structure, I was really excited to go into the online discussions to see what my students said. In fact, sometimes my husband would get angry with me because I'm at the breakfast table with my laptop. I'm on there, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Hey, I want to see what they said." So there can be that excitement that you get in the face-to-face classroom. And yet, that's not what we do in a traditional online course. And that's the problem for me. Instead, we ask students the same question, and we have 20 to 40 repeated exchanges in which we ask each student to post and reply to. These exchanges are boring and repetitive because they often resemble homework assignments, which students are asked to comment on. Thus, each student posts a response similar to their classmates, even if we use that D2L feature in which you don't allow students to view their classmates' posts until they've responded, right? And then they have to struggle for something new to say when they're asked to comment on another's post. And that leads to this somewhat humorous example, right? Where, what else can you say about 2 plus 2 equals 4? Well, I like how you added them together and got 4. Very insightful, right? And so it's funny and it's sad because it resonates. I mean, look how many shares and likes it got. online instructor and an online student, I found that these post and reply to two exchanges, or as I call them, dreaded discussions, encourage intelligent, smart students to make uninspired comments that decrease interest in the topic rather than increasing it. And thus we get the lackluster performance in the discussions. Students would rather do anything than post in these exchanges. We would never ask each student in our face-to-face class the same question and then make everyone listen to that answer, right, going around the room. If we did, they'd look like this. And if we don't do it in a face-to-face classroom, why do it online? And thus, any time I spend in one of these post and reply to two forums feels like a waste of time for me. I've never felt that way in a classroom discussion. So, I'd like to hear from you. What do you dread about online discussions, if you do? So here's some of your choices about students not participating or participating poorly, time-consuming, boring, difficult to grade, or you can choose other, and then if you would add that to the group chat, that would be really great. You can select so I see, yeah, all of the above, the short responses, the boringness, difficult to grade. So we'll wait just a few more seconds and see who else wants to participate. Having 300 students to grade every week. So yeah, we'll look at how to handle that. Last minute posting, yeah, the time consuming, the same thing, right, over and over. Oh, and using their friends' posts from friends who have previously taken the class, responding, difficult to grade. Okay. I think that's sort of slowing down, so we'll move on so you can see the results here. So the poor responses is the winner, but everything else is pretty evenly divided, as you can see here. And from a student perspective, they're overused. So we'll try to address some of these concerns as we go through. So given these concerns, right, so why do we use these homework style discussions in the first place? I think part of the reason is that once something gets put in place, it's difficult to get rid of. And so what is becomes what is right. I think the post and reply to two discussion structure developed because there was a concern about the rigor of online learning and concerns about assessment. These are easier to grade, and people they were concerned about online discussions and online learning in general. And so they became used to assess whether or not students read the chapter, and that became more important than engagement. As I mentioned earlier, we don't assess in a face-to-face class whether every student read the chapter by asking each student the same question. And so why would we do that in an online class? For online discussions, I think assessment should not be the priority because they're really great for engagement, or they can be, right? Because they can help students and encourage and create engagement with the material, help students develop connections with each other, construct knowledge together, and that social aspect of learning is essential to being an effective learning. And then we can use quizzes and homework for assessing whether they read the chapter, whether they've learned it and understood it, and we'll look at some ways that you can actually assess the discussions. So here's one possible solution. So as I pointed out earlier, I showed this example. We can create these discussions that are exciting and as meaningful as a face-to-face class, and we can create this cohesive online community. So I'm going to compare the two. So in the current example, the way it's usually done, each student is starting their own thread, and then they're supposed to reply to each other. And so you get these little mini exchanges. But we can change the structure and have the instructor start the discussion and then have a real discussion take place. So in this example here, right, the instructor, myself, posted a question. Students are responding through the week. You can see them responding to each other. And then I come in and I ask a scaffolding question. So I'm probably going to summarize what everyone said so far. I'm going to use their names because that really helps you connect with students. And then I'm going to redirect or deepen the conversation somehow. And another thing is that you can have a couple of threads each week that you can plan and direct so you can cover more material. For my undergraduate class, I usually have 3 or 4 threads for each chapter or module so that I can cover the important or difficult topics in a chapter. For my graduate class this spring, I just had a couple of threads because their posts are more broad, farther afield than an undergraduate. And so this is where the time savings come into play because you get these sub-discussions as shown in these circles. If you have these micro exchanges in post and reply to 2, I'm going to want to go in there and fix every time a student has an error. I'm going to want to let them know, no, that's not quite right. As the book says, we really need to pay attention to this other material. And that gets really boring for me and takes a lot of time. But with this structure, because students are responding to each other and they're adding new material just like you would in a classroom discussion, I get a lot less repetition and I can respond to groups of students. And so as I mentioned earlier, each time I post, I'll sort of look at the end of one of these sub-discussions in one of these circles here, and I will, respond, hey, Susie, Joni, Tom, and, so on. Great job. So I give them some encouragement, summarize, and we have a great discussion that way. And so for me, this has been a great thing for me. The only problem with this model is that sometimes I get too much engagement. And then, too many posts from a lot of students can really be a problem. So some things I've done for my graduate class, I narrowed down the window. Another time for an undergraduate class, I just said you can make 3 to 5 posts, replies each week. And, so make them count. And if I have 1 or 2 students who just want to respond to every single thing, I might ask them to help me facilitate or to email me, their extra posts if they feel really excited and want to write it out. Because as we know, writing is a really excellent part of the learning process. So how do we get students on board and let them know how to do this? So I start with a course announcement and an email before the semester starts, and I let them know, hey, this is going to be a different discussion style than you've seen before. I'm going to start the discussion threads, and you'll be replying to me. And so after one student replies to me, everyone else will be replying to each other. And to keep track of that, you'll want to use the name of the person you're responding to. So read each other's threads, add new material, and so on. I also include the rubric that I'm going to use in that announcement, and I let them know in a separate announcement a few little D2L instructions that I'll share with you in just a minute. And then I remind them the goal of the conversation is to really have a great conversation. That's what it's all about. It's not about homework and getting the right answer. It's about really engaging with the material. But they do need to use the assigned readings. So if it's an undergraduate class, I say you have to use terminology from the assigned chapters. But if it's a graduate class, I say, just make sure you're citing some readings or some research or something. They also have to demonstrate critical thinking. I grade that on a more intuitive level. I ask that they introduce a new perspective and that they're collaborating with their peers. So someone asked, what do you do with students who ignored the previous discussion and just come in the classroom to post something that's either contradictory or unrelated to the discussion that you just summarized and asked to bring greater in depth and breadth to? So for those students, I will usually email them separately. I'll explain to them my process, what I'm trying to have happen here and what I'm trying to move away from. So here's just a little bit of D2L Brightspace on the settings. So it is much easier to do these discussions in grid view because you can see who responded to whom and sort of that cascade of responses. It can be done in reading view, but I don't suggest it. It's just a lot more difficult. So for the settings, right? So in D2L, next to your name, there's that little drop-down menu, and you select Account Settings. In Account Settings, you click on the Discussion tab, and then you'll want to select Grid View. And for the Grid View settings, you want to select Threaded as your default threaded style. Now you'll notice that I do not have a check mark to include the original post in your reply, because then these posts would get really, really long and unruly if you did that. Sometimes students do, and again, I'll post an announcement saying, hey, these are getting pretty long. Please go in and uncheck that. I also will post a reminder the second week or the second time I'm going to do a discussion and say, hey, if your discussions look like this, and I show them the reading view, and instead of this, the grid view, you might want to make this change so it's easier to follow. So Margaret asked, what do you think about the use of discussion boards for formative assessment? I think they're great, and I used them this past spring for my graduate class, and I made that particular forum so they could make an anonymous post, and they had some great discussions, and it was very helpful. And I think I attribute the online discussions and that formative assessment to the fact that I got 100% on my evaluation responses, not of how many students responded to those. Are there posting requirements? Yes, I asked that for my undergraduate class, usually it's 3 posts. For a graduate class, maybe where I'm really focusing on the discussions, I had 5 posts. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more in just a little bit, Carolyn. And make sure you have them click Save and Close. Another thing that I do is I do have introductions, an introductory forum for my course. And I think that's really important because it gives a chance for students to get to know each other. And I cannot stress enough the importance of having that friendly conversation so that students can develop connections and empathy with each other and with you as the instructor. That really helps their learning process down the road, and there's a lot of research on that. So here's some of the things that I do. So my favorite thing to do is this 2 truths and a lie. Some of you might have done that in a face-to-face class, and it's very similar to what you would do online. So I introduce myself with that first post, and then I have a short paragraph, and then I have 3 statements, 2 of which are true and 1 is a lie. The next student is instructed, when you reply, you let me know which statement of mine you think was a lie, and then you share a little bit about yourself and then 3 statements. And then the next student responds to him or her, and so on. And then towards the end of the week, I ask students, go back and let everyone know which statement was true and which was a lie. Another thing that you can do if you want to have your your introductory discussion just be everyone introduces themselves. But if you want to introduce them to this new method, is that you have the class tell a story, but only like 3 or 5 words at a time. So I would start the thread with once upon a time. The next person copies that into their thread, adds a few more words. They post, and everyone adds words onto the story. And that could be sort of fun, too. But it gets them used to replying. So given some of the challenges we've talked about, why do we assign challenges? What's their value? Well, from Merrill, we know that learning is promoted when learners are engaged in solving real-world problems. And you can tell here there is a lot of learning going on. So not only are these kids learning about engineering, right, but they're also learning about, social issues, psychology, and, how angry maybe their parents are going to be when they see this. People also learn when existing knowledge is activated as a foundation for new knowledge. So in a discussion, you can remind them, hey, in the previous discussion, we talked about this. Now in these new circumstances, we're going to try to apply it. Also, in the online discussions, you can demonstrate new knowledge to students and then give them a chance to practice that. Also, students have to have a chance to apply what they've learned. So no matter how much you talk about swimming or read about it or hear others, until you get into the water, you are not going to know what it's like. And so our challenge as instructors is to think about what's the water of my class and how can I get my students into it in a discussion. So someone asked about, I'm sorry, I missed a couple questions. So someone asked about how do you handle very large classes? I would, if I had a really large class, I've done classes up to 40 where I had 3 classes of 40 at a time. I would probably not do discussions every week. So I would maybe do them, if I had 120 students, maybe every 3rd week I would be doing discussions. And I would have them maybe higher level so that you had time, to get to everybody. How do you deal with time delays between posts, threads, replies if the group members are in different time zones? Oh, most of my students have always been in different time zones, but with an asynchronous discussion, that's not really a problem. I mean, that's really the wonder of it all, is that some people can come in whenever they want and reply to, jump into a conversation and make their contribution. So I hope that helps answer that question, Darren. And I'll look back over there to see if it did. And then also people learn when they have a chance to integrate that information into their world. So to give them a chance to narratize it somehow. And from Chickering and Gamson's, seminal work and Graham et al., we have a lot of years of experience showing that student-faculty contact's really important. And so online discussions are great for that. When students have an instructor respond to their posts, they feel like what they said is important and that they're then more likely to want to be recognized again, and they're going to post again. Yet it's important not to dominate the discussion by responding to every post. So what I do is I use a spreadsheet to keep track of who I've responded to over those first few discussions to make sure that I respond to each student at least once. Because some students are really easy to respond to because they make really, provocative questions or posts, and other students are more challenging. But I try to respond to each of them. And in that spreadsheet, I also have some of their personal information from the introduction, and when I can, I work that into my response. Again, it forms a deeper connection with students, and they really like it. Online discussions also allow for cooperation among students, so they have a chance to collaborate and connect with each other, and that then they form relationships, and that really increases retention and really can help them. Additionally, students often learn better from each other than they do from us, from instructors. And finally, when students engage with the material in active learning exercises such as case studies, debates, engaging discussions, then they're using the information they're learning, and that really helps with the process. So the community of inquiry model, I think, is an essential part of online discussions. I didn't discover that until a couple of years ago, but as soon as I came across it, I said, oh, yes, this is why we need to change online discussions. So the community of inquiry model was first developed by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer in 2000, and they were exploring the components necessary for learning to take place in the classroom. And they found that besides the cognitive and teaching presence that most teachers readily bring to a teaching environment, students also need a social presence, the instructor's social presence and their own, in order to learn effectively. When instructors bring their whole self into the learning environment, students can do so too because the instructors are modeling an integrated approach to learning. If students feel that they need to leave a part of themselves outside the learning environment, then their learning experience is less effective. So in a face-to-face classroom, the social aspect of learning is pretty easy, right? We talk to our students before class, after class. We hear what they're saying. We join in. We share what we did with our weekend or how we fell off the ladder or whatever. But it allows us to form connections. So in an online class, however, you have to make a really explicit effort to have that social presence. And I think that this restructuring of the discussions really allows for that because you're responding to groups of students. You can offer them some encouragement. You can respond to some of the emotional expressions. Other things that you can do to have that social presence is, of course, having your own bio, some personal and professional information, share sort of teaching stories and so on. And I think that all of those things are helpful. Someone said that they'd like a sample spreadsheet, and Murray, if you would email me, I can send that to you. But I'll probably send you a blank one because then I just sort of fill it in, with pen or pencil as I go along. But I can definitely share that. Another thing that's important is a cognitive presence. As I mentioned earlier, my background is in cognitive psychology, and so here's a basic cognitive information processing model. Because I think that if we can understand how students learn, we can understand how to reach them. So this is basic, right? So we take in information through our senses. We see something, we hear something. It comes into our sensory memory. And for those of you who are trying to remember what that's called, it's iconic memory and echoic memory. What we pay attention to goes into short-term or working memory. And by rehearsing that, we can keep that sort of going in short-term memory. But then to get it into long-term memory, we need to attend to the information. We need to encode it in some deep and meaningful way. And so we can do that in the online discussions by asking students to apply the information, to integrate it, evaluate it, to narratize what they're learning, to connect it to other things that they've learned before. And if those verbs there look familiar to you, yes, they're from Bloom's taxonomy. So this is Bloom's taxonomy for the cognitive domain. I know many of you are very familiar with this, some less so let me just spend 1 minute on this. So we often just refer to it as Bloom's taxonomy, but he came up with a couple, one for the affective domain and others. But usually if you hear someone talk about Bloom's taxonomy, this is the one. So he looked at the different levels of learning, and there's basic knowledge that we can just recognize, being able to retrieve it. And then the next level is comprehension, right? Being able to understand it or determine its meaning. But the deeper levels, where you get really interesting conversations taking place, are when students are asked to apply knowledge to some actual situation, to either analyze or synthesize, right? They're breaking things down or building things up from parts to some new whole. And then the great conversations come when we are evaluating. We ask students to evaluate information, sort of argue or justify their viewpoint. So the questions. Simple carbs like white bread and cupcakes are easily digested, but they don't stick with you. Similarly, simple questions may be easy to answer and grade, but they don't help real learning take place, and they don't lead to social and academic engagement in which students construct knowledge. It's helpful to start your threads by asking a blend of simple and complex questions that help students evaluate what they've learned. So, in D2L, where you would normally post a question, I post these instructions. And then I save my question for the threads, right? So I'm starting the threads. So in my instructions, I remind them, hey, this isn't an assignment. This is a discussion, right? Listen, read what everyone says, use terminology, use people's names, but critique, debate, evaluate, right? Have a good time here, and let's engage with the material. So the example on the left is a typical question from a course that I teach in which the questions are mandated, right? So the course is already created, and this is what you have to do. And then I had to use that question, so I worked it into a more complex question. The advantage of asking multiple questions and multiple types of questions is that you open up the discussion so that you can have a lot of different kinds of discussions happening. And if you allow students to edit the subject line, which I strongly suggest, then you can sort of see what's happening with the discussions and where it's going and who's talking about what. Because this is an introductory class, I've highlighted the big names, the terminology, and so on. And also highlighting the terminology reminds them to use it and reminds them that, hey, I don't just want them spouting off opinions. I want them to have the responses grounded in what they're learning. Masoud asked, what do you think about the idea of posting 4 or 5 questions for discussion assignments? That way students can select one question from their list and reply to the other posts. I think that's a great idea, Masoud. I often have 4 or 5 discussions. I ask students, try to participate in 2 or 3 so that I see that they've got a little bit of breadth, but sometimes, the depth can be really effective too. If they're not doing well in maybe some quizzes, then and they're only focusing in one discussion, I might suggest, hey, you might want to participate in different discussions to really, give you a chance to practice what you're learning before you take those quizzes. And then Masoud also said, with your new approach, do you feel you are spending a lot of time online responding to students' replies and discussions? No, I think I spend less time because I get to reply to groups of students. And I don't need to reply to every question. I let students know, hey, you can ask questions, and then other students are coming in and answering. But I definitely have a presence. So I'm trying to get in there once a day, sort of read, make sure that no one's gone really off the rails or, had said something inflammatory and maybe a post that I need to get rid of. But, make sure that they're on track, and then I have one post to a group of students and let them know, hey, I'm here, and I'm letting you know what's happening. As I mentioned before, right, so I'm using Bloom's taxonomy. I do have some simple questions in there because that's where some students are at, right? They're hanging on with their fingertips in your class. They can barely understand the material, and so you need some simple questions so that they have a chance to practice and write what they know. But as I mentioned before, you want to have these sort of tri-level provocative questions, and I'll get to the provocative part in just a minute. So you want some questions that can just be answered from the course materials, sort of basic stuff, and you don't have to worry about some students, or all students just answering those questions, because many students will want to relate the course material to the individual, which is the next set. But the really interesting questions are when you're relating the course material to some broader context. So let's say you have an engineering class and you're thinking, oh, okay, engineering questions and some engineering context. Well, you could ask them, what happens if this technology we're developing, what happens if everybody in society adopts it? How's that going to affect the economy, the environment, and so on? And so you think, well, what's the value of that in my engineering class? Well, that leads to some problems that might have engineering solutions. And so then they can start brainstorming on new ways to solve that problem. And it gets them really interested in the conversation. So James asks, how do you handle the notorious group of procrastinators that post at the last minute? I don't give them points for it, basically. But I'll answer that in just a few minutes, James, if you can just hold on with that question. So your question types, right? You need those higher order questions that are on the deep end of Bloom's taxonomy. Questions that have conditional phrasing, like, what might happen if, everyone did X? Or what might happen, and get them sort of evaluating the information. You want them to be applying it to reality-based learning situations, and you want to push them into making decisions. So remember back to that cognitive model, right? What they pay attention to, what grabs their attention, then that's more likely to get into long-term memory. So you want to maybe share a provocative quote or passage in the beginning of as your post, or maybe you have some poignant description or image followed with some questions, an engaging vignette, right, from the popular media. When I taught a leadership class, I used to show, the first 5 minutes of Armageddon, right? So you've got Bruce Willis there, playing golf, chasing, someone around. But he saves the world, right? So I use cartoons sometimes. I use teaching stories. And all of these things I store in a program called Evernote, but you'll definitely want some kind of note-taking system because it will save a lot of time, and then you can just edit it for each class. But I'll talk more about them. But push students into a dilemma and make sure that whatever it is, you can make it relevant to their current life or their future work life or how they might use that. Sam asks, I can see how having a prompt with multiple questions would yield a variety of responses. Have you ever gotten feedback from students that they were confused about how they were to respond? I think maybe a couple students have, and I just remind them, hey, really, my goal here is to have you engage with the material. So if you don't get any of the questions I'm asking, tell me what you know. If that's where you're at. And students who are sometimes confused, that's probably where they're at. And as long as they're engaging, that's what I'm interested in. So you want to create room for discussion. And so make a provocative statement, maybe ask a guiding questions, or sometimes I present a situation and say, what do you think? And those can be some of the greatest conversations. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions here with the rubric. Because D2L has these rubrics that are really convenient to fit right into your grading, I like to use them because it sort of helps students see where they're at. And I've shared this rubrics in case this is a little small for you to read. But I don't assess discussions on whether they got the right answer, right? I'm looking, did they use the material? Did they use each other's names? Are they responding to someone else instead of just responding to my questions? And those are the biggies for me, right? And then are they doing some critical thinking? Obviously, I'm interested in that. Are they adding new things, moving the conversation forward? And then professional writing and citation. So for about those last-minute posters, at the bottom here you can see I have quantity. They get 9 points if they make their 3 responses on 3 different days. They only get 6 points if it's on 2 different days, and if they're all in there on Sunday night at midnight, they only get 3 points, even though they might have 3 great posts, which I've graded, as far as their quality. So they might have great quality, but for their quantity, they're only getting 3 points. And then just to make the math work out, for this, I think it's 1 point for posting by Wednesday of the week, but whatever you want in there, depending on how many points. You can also grade based on a holistic rubric where you have, various criteria and then just, give them some points. I don't agonize over the grading process because my goal is, are the students engaged with the material? And if they're engaging, I'm giving them points. And so from that perspective, you might just want to get rid of the rubric, right? And just sort of have some criteria, really engaging. You're collaborating with each other. You've got, sufficient number of posts or something like that. So I wouldn't sweat it too much. I also use a lot of boilerplate, especially this first, 2 or 3 weeks. I have a lot of boilerplate, and I used to feel really guilty about it because, I should have individualized responses for each student, but I can't do that with 120 students. And if I'm going to write the same thing over and over because so many students need the same feedback, why not just make it easier for myself and use some boilerplate? Now, that boilerplate, I never use the same boilerplate from week to week because that will really make them angry, because they think, oh, she's not doing anything. So I have different boilerplate, and maybe students are sharing and maybe they're not, but I do personalize that for each student. So while I'm during the week, while I'm in the discussions, if I see something interesting, I just make a little comment in the grade book because I have 2 windows open. And that way, when I go to grade at the end of the week, I've got something personal. I use some boilerplate. I delete what's not needed for that student, and I'm done. And those first few weeks, maybe I do spend more time, but I don't have papers to grade. I probably don't have assignments. And then the benefit is the rest of the semester, I'm sitting back. I'm enjoying the discussions. Sometimes, after those first few weeks, my feedback in the grade book is, wow, great job. I really enjoyed your discussion. Because I do, because I am. And that's the exciting part of this for me. So as I mentioned, I use some time-saving techniques to make this all work. For me, Evernote's my friend, right? I store my initial and follow-up questions there, my focus questions, re-engagement prompts, any scaffolding things, my multimedia, links, to everything, and all of my gradebook boilerplate. And it just makes it really easy. I'm always adding in new material, and you know how sometimes you add in something new and like everyone looks at you in the classroom like, what are you talking about, Dr. Ropenack? Well, the same thing can happen online. And so then I have to, add another question and add another question, re-explain myself, and then, oh, now we get it. So then based on that, right, I figure out, oh, here's how I should have asked the question in the first place. I delete my other stuff from Evernote, and I put in, here's the question to ask. And it's a much better question. And then I'll refine it, each time I teach the class. But I do, personalize as much as I can. Another option is to have students facilitate the discussion. We have an instructor here at the University of West Georgia who does this. She's teaching teachers how to teach online. And so they're, practicing what they've been learning about. And I think it's really great in that circumstance. Some things to think about if you're going to have students facilitate is how many students will be in each group, how many posts do they need to make each week, if there's logistical support needed, who's going to do it, who's going to create the questions. But it can be very effective, and this instructor thinks that the discussions are better when she's not there. I think for her circumstance, it's definitely appropriate. I'm not sure that it works for every class. I've had students in my graduate class say probably 90% of the students said they were really glad that I participated in the discussions. They felt like what they said mattered to me, that it was important. And as you can see, or as I mentioned, I had such great participation, I had to decrease the number of days. But, there might be other ways to do that. Maybe you have some other discussion going, or every other discussion you're participating in, or something like that. So there's a lot of things that you can do to make it work. What I've found with these discussions is just endless possibilities. Anything that I've done in a face-to-face class, I can do online. So problem-based learning, role plays, guided learning, reflections, it can all be done. And the advantage of these real discussions is that students are really engaging with the material. They're forming friendships and connections with each other. And it provides them a forum in which they can know and be known. And that's essential for effective learning. Also, my feedback in the discussions and grade books lets them know that I, at least, have really heard them. And then, it saves time because I'm responding to groups and not these individuals. These meaningful discussions relate to the course concepts, and they're setting the stage for more conversation. So I've had students say in a discussion, well, I was talking about this with my family last night at the dinner table, right? So they're bringing this into their lives because it has real-world application. I'm modeling critical thinking and analysis in my posts, and I'm trying to encourage and uplift them. And so the advantages for students is they're academically and socially engaged. They're collaborating, they're learning, they're constructing knowledge. And I'm a constructivist, okay, if you haven't figured that out by now. As an instructor, you can cover more topics because you've got a number of threads there. You can plan and direct your threads. You know where they're going next because you've taught it in the classroom or you've taught it online several times, and it's less time, and there's definitely less repetition and drudgery. So just sort of putting it all together, remember you need to get them to attend to information in order to process it. Got the community of inquiry model, having that social presence, being yourself. Bring yourself, your excitement into the classroom, into these discussions. And this is sort of a summary. This is in the handout. Make sure that the students and you are clear on those learning objectives. Start those threads, have a hook, Bloom's taxonomy, and then forming these various connections. So if you have some questions, please email me. Here's my email address. You can call me. I'm generally in my office from 7 to 4 Eastern Time. I would love to talk to you about this. As you can tell, this is my thing. I'm excited about it. So don't feel like, oh, I don't want to bother her. No, you won't be bothering me. I'll be all excited. So if there's any additional questions.
So Beth Renee, very excellent job, of course, but we'll just give them 60 seconds or so to put something into either the Q&A or the group chat. I think that we have caught all of the questions and comments that came in both of those places. So pretty sure. But if we missed a question of yours, you can repost it right now, and we'll try to get to it in the next couple of minutes.
And I see that someone else mentioned that Evernote is awesome and that they also use it frequently. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I find it a very useful tool.
I use it a lot myself, and I did a webinar a month or 2 months ago, maybe it was, and I talked a little bit about using Evernote because I also use it because my phone does such a great job of voice to text. I will dictate to my phone in Evernote, which then of course I can access Evernote whether it's on my phone again or through the browser on my computer, and I can take what I've dictated and copy and paste it into whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish. I use it in other ways too, but I found that to be a really useful thing. I can dictate into Evernote anytime I want to, and then access it in various different places. So I also find it pretty awesome. Nate doesn't really have a question, but he does say, great presentation. This gives me a lot to think about in terms of restructuring my online courses, so that is wonderful. And Maggie's asking where she can get a handout. So Maggie, a couple of things. One is right now in the resources box, there is a link to her handout. I will be posting a PDF of her handout on the archives page. So there's also a link to the archives page. It might not be until tomorrow, but I'll try to get it done today if I can. So the handout is available right this minute to you. It will be available going forward on the archive page as well. And you can always email Beth Renee if you need to, but we should be able to get it to you. And the same thing is true with the slides. If you notice on those archive page, we post a link to the recording. We post a link to the slide, or not a link, we embed the slides, or yeah, I guess it's a link to the slides, and any other handouts. So basically in that one spot, you will be able to get all of those things. And I see lots of thank yous coming in. So I'm going to Evernote is cloud-based. Yes, Cheryl, it is, and free. You can. It's a freemium. You can pay to get the premium model. I use the free one, and I have lots of functionality, so I I'm not looking to deal with anything else. So here's something
Chris,
for you, Beth Renee.
Yeah, so Chris, you asked, how do you deal with discussions in large classes or sections without getting overwhelmed? Um, if I had a very large section, as I mentioned earlier, I would not do discussions every week. So I would sort of think, what can I handle? I might, have some other options, maybe some homework or something that they're doing. I would use quizzes, as I could to assess, that they're understanding and get them going. And you might try breaking them into groups. So, even if you've cross-listed a class or something, so you have a really large section, you might try breaking it into groups of, maybe 30 to 40 students, and then you can be participating there as well. And if you want to call me and talk about a particular situation, I'm more than willing to talk to you about that.
All right. Well, I think that everything else coming in are just lots and lots of thank yous.
Right. Someone said, do you encounter a lot of branches of a discussion, right? Two people respond to the same post and it leads to two discussions, both valid and on topic. Absolutely. And that's my favorite part about this, James, is you get these really great discussions branching off into different areas, and that makes it a lot of fun for me.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Beth Renee, I want to thank you so much for all of your time in preparing for today's webinar, plus your expertise that you shared so willingly with the community. We had over 100 people join us live, and there will be probably another 100 who will receive the link to the recording who are interested in the topic but didn't join us. So so your knowledge is far-reaching, and we really do appreciate it. With that, I will give you the last word.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your attention and for your time. And I look forward to having discussions with you online and on the phone. Thank you so much.
All right. Hope to see you all next week or at other webinars in the future through the Brightspace community. Thanks, everybody.